Very not. For kids, your discretion.
Hey kids, Joseph de Mombro was an insane man born in southern France in 1924. Wow, Joseph, you're quick to call him insane. Just wait a minute, okay? But if you must know, he later in life talked joyously about how his sister was decapitated after sticking her head out of a train window. He married in 1944 to try to avoid forced labor by the hands of Germany, especially after a friend of his house was burnt for helping the French resistance. De Mombro almost had that same fate, but he played the violin.
Oh, my bad. Didn't know you were chill like that.
He was a jeweler by day, but an esotericist at night, and he was particularly interested in the Knights Templar. But after 22 years of this, he divorced his first wife, marrying again fairly soon after. He then stole all the golden jewels from his business partner. And while on a trip to Tel Aviv with his second wife, who was pregnant at the time, he believed that his son that was soon to be born in Israel would have an exceptional destiny. And that's a quote, get used to it. And so, Eli, because I can't pronounce this, de Mombro was born in Tel Aviv. They moved back to France 3 years later, and de Mombro became a psychiatrist. That was until it was found out that he wrote hot checks, breached patient trust laws, and was impersonating a psychiatrist the entire time. So, in a logical step, he then made the Sovereign Military Order of the Temple of Jerusalem, something our friend Andrew Chappell would have liked. Yeah, white supremacy again. I really don't know how this keeps happening. Anyway, in 1973, de Mombro, henceforth called Joe because de Mombro is too long, creates the Center for the Preparation of the New Age, which should have gotten him rated then and there. Cult-ass name. 2 years after that, he founded the Brotherhood of the Pyramid, or La Pyramide for short, a group dedicated to diet and spirituality. And just like the Sovereign Temple, this was based in Geneva. The center thingy was based in Cologne-sur-Salève, so it's a bit different and I can't find any more info on it. But I have information later, just hear me out. In 1977, an orchestra conductor by the name of Michel Tabachnik would visit and in time join the cult. A year later, they would create the Golden Way Foundation with Michel at its head. This foundation would talk about things such as pollution, ecology, and society. In 1979, La Pyramide's headquarters were set aflame, allegedly for insurance money by Joe. But either way, with the pyramid behind them, Joe and Michel started looking for new members, while Joe became increasingly insane and started believing himself a medium, or a reincarnation, or both. In 1952, French author Jacques Brier would create the Sovereign Order of the Solar Temple. It was weird, but not weird enough. So, right-wing activist Julian Oygas would create a schism and then create the renewed Order of the Solar Temple in 1968. This will be important later, but also because I have to introduce the next moving piece of the puzzle. Luc Jouret. This man was born in the Belgian Congo in the latter part of 1947, but moved to Belgium with his family sometime in the 1950s. He was a decent athlete until Koch's arthrosis decided to ruin it. He was bedridden for many a month, over a year. And he became bitter at both modern medicine and the fact he couldn't be an athlete anymore. He went to a homeopath and his condition improved. Not knowing correlation does not exactly mean causation, he attributed his health to homeopathy, but went ahead and got his medical degree anyway, after 2 years of throwing his classes. This is when he became intrigued by such things as iridology, macrobiotics, and acupuncture. Oh yeah, and then he became a Maoist, learning Chinese traditional medicine and communism. He was placed under surveillance because of this, especially after co-founding the Parti Communautaire Européen. He graduated in 1974 with that medicine degree, but this wasn't good enough. So he joined the Belgian Airborne Division to spread communism within its ranks. I'm not making that up. And by the time Tabachnik joined Joe in his Golden Way thing, Luke had already gone to the Philippines and China to study spiritual healing, even becoming a certified homeopath in France. After all that, though, he settled at the French-Swiss border and made a homeopathy business. Then he went ahead and founded his own cult called the Atlanta Club, which went absolutely nowhere. He met with the Sovereign Order treasurer Camille Perret, who suffered a heart attack, and they started giving ideas to one another. So Luke did some lectures for different groups interested in what he had to say. And important to this story, in 1981 he gave a lecture to Golden Way, defending homeopathy and the paranormal. Joe was so impressed with Luke that he asked him to join the cult. He agreed. Now we're caught up to the Golden Way Cult Foundation thingy. And with Luke and Joe at its head, it only gets worse. Joe infiltrated the renewed Temple Order in 81. So does Luke. So Origos visits Goldenway and then asks Luke to join him, which he does. And Origos, probably due to some health reasons, steps down as Grand Master. So Joe asks Luke to assume the role, which he does. That was until Origos' daughter expelled Luke, and Luke creates yet another schism by bringing about 30 people of the Renewed Order to Goldenway. Joe and Luke, along with these 30 members, then create the International Order of the Chivalrous Solar Tradition, leaving Tabachnik with Goldenway as its president. A then 57-year-old Joe has an affair with 21-year-old Dominique Belleton. This was to create, and I cannot stress enough, this is a quote, a cosmic child king for the community, saying that this would be the, and I quote again, Christ of the New Age, losing their Christianity license. However, the king was rather a queen, and Joe blamed Belleton for being human, implying that he wasn't. They named her Emmanuel, but also Chris as a cosmic name, which is rather progressive, but also kind of fucked up at the same time. But the next year, in 1982, Joe proclaims himself a reincarnation of Moses, Akhenaten, Osiris, and the Italian esoteric Cagliostro. This is while Luke proclaims himself a reincarnation of Jesus, doubling down on losing that license. Eventually, though, Goldenway and the International Order of the Chivalrous Solar Tradition, try saying that 5 times fast, merge, sometime in about 1984, creating the Order of the Solar Temple. So, let's talk about their beliefs, shall we? They took some inspiration from Aleister Crowley, which is a whole other rabbit hole I might delve into later, but they established 7 different objectives. Firstly, to re-establish knowledge of authority and power. Secondly, to affirm the primacy of spirituality over the temporal. C, to make man aware of his dignity. 4, to help humanity through its passage. 5, participate in the assumption of Earth, whatever the fuck that means. G, help unify the Christian and Islamic churches. Apparently they lost their Abrahamic license because of this. And the most key objective, to aid in the return of Christ in solar glory. They would also establish a nuclear survival compound in Quebec with an organic farm. They purchased this compound after Joe set up a bunch of subsidiaries and shell companies to launder money. In Quebec, they would start stockpiling weapons to fight off whatever was to happen at the end of times, which is supposedly in about the 1990s. But what helped with that is Joe's gun trafficking ring. Joe, Luc, and Belleton, and the treasurer from before, Camille Preret, all end up with a private chalet in Quebec. Now, you may ask, how do you launder money with no money at all? Well, there were membership fees paid monthly by all members, and like I said, gun trafficking. But these fees would be rather exorbitant due to the fact that most members were actually pretty well off. Some people gave even over $1 million Canadian dollars. But with all the money, they didn't know what to do other than buy real estate. At Joe's discretion, Tabachnik wrote 21 ways to ascend the ranks of the order, which were rather vague and not understood well at all, so Tabachnik would have to travel around and explain it all. The cult mainly focused on French speakers, but Spain would also find itself victim after Luke gave some lectures there. This was about the time that members of the cult started wearing crusader-esque robes and would carry swords with their names etched into them. The robes changed color depending on what rank. White robes were for lower class, black robes for middle class, and gold robes for the most devoted. They also held a bunch of rituals, and a lot of members actually gave accounts that they saw the masters, whatever they were, Jesus, the 12 apostles, Excalibur, yeah, the fictional sword, and the Holy Grail. But later on, it was found out that it was just Joe's wife on a stool, somehow making these things appear in shadows. Some members, just about 3 years after the founding of the order, had some issues with things. Antonio Dutoit, remember that name, blew the whistle on Joe's embezzlement, deceit, and even his megalomania, which somehow no one saw coming. Joe even didn't practice what he preached. Who would have thunk? Even Eli, the dambro born in Tel Aviv that had an exceptional destiny. Yeah, remember that one? He even talked about the state of the finances of the cult, which were not great, and that the masters I couldn't find any info on didn't even exist. In light of all this, some members asked for a refund, but the money was already spent. Joe, Belleton, and Luke looked really good in their Gucci outfits, though. Due to this, a lot of people leave. The first mass exodus of the group, leaving only the core members, numbering rather small compared to having over 400 members prior. Joe saw this as a problem, and he only entrusted the most devoted, usually spreading information only to them. But by the end of the 90s, Joe starts sabotaging the lectures Luke was giving, forcing Luke to become totally dependent on Joe. And while Luc was away in Quebec, Joe takes away his Grandmaster rank. They build 3 more chalets, but this time in Switzerland, while the commune in Quebec is raided for the aforementioned stockpiling of weapons. This apparently came to be after Luc asked some members to procure some semi-auto firearms with silencers. Due to the media and press attention this brought to the group, though, Joe actually ends up losing his Hindu card as well, as he proclaims it is now the beginning of the Kali Yuga, and then starts talking about how they could transit to another planet. When 1994 comes around, Joe summons everyone to the headquarters, explaining that the leadership was to transit to the star Sirius, leaving the other members to continue whatever the fuck the cult's aims actually were. Joe also claims that a mass exodus of members, not of the, leaving type, but of the non-monetizable type, happened in January in Australia. A claim that New South Wales police deny. They also start spying on members, especially the ones that said they wanted out, forcing many to actually leave. Joe started sending orders to his most devoted in exactly 3 stages. 1. Eliminate traitors of the organization. 2. To execute people that wanted to transit but not become a casualty. And C. Then to execute people who would actually transit and become a casualty. Half a year later, they would rename themselves to the Rose Cross Alliance. But this was to reach, quote, an irreversible stage of the return of the Father, and to bring about, and again another quote, the 5th reign and the abolition of hierarchies. If this wasn't a warning call to anyone, I can't think of a better one. Only 6 days later, Belleton lured Antonio Dutoit and his wife to Joe's chalet in France. They brought with them their perishable 2-month-old Christopher Emmanuel. And do you remember how I said that Joe's favorite child was named both Chris and Emmanuel? He did not take it lightly that the Dutoits ripped him off. He ordered 2 knights to perish the child by using a wooden stake through the heart multiple times. And this was because Joe said it was the Antichrist, for a name that could easily be changed. The parents were then viciously attacked and perished as a result. One of the knights and his wife stayed to clean the mess, while Belleton and the other knight flee to Switzerland. Those that remained at the chalet then set it ablaze and self-exodused. Less than a week later, 2 fires are started in Switzerland, one at a farm and one at a set of 3 chalets. At the farm, 23 people, dressed in their robes, heads out, feet together, forming a circle. Plastic bags were found around their heads. 20 were shot through the bag, 22 were drugged from benzos, and another one had theobromine, which is a far step down from benzo, but to each their own. The circle had 3 categories. The awakened, or the most devoted, were found in the center. They had poisoned themselves after mass exodusing the rest of the members. Immortals, who were probably the ones who were okay with transit, but not a physical exodus, were the ones shot. And then the traitors on the outside who were just outright, for YouTube's sake, I'll just say caught lacking. This is where Joe, his wife, and Emmanuel would be found. As for the chalets, Luc was found there. Most of the 25 also found there were found to be poisoned with benzos, karate, and opioids. The same plastic bags covered their heads, though. Some believe the bags is going back to the ecological roots that Golden Way had, almost as a warning of some ecological disaster that definitely didn't happen. But the farm and the chalets were burned down with automatic ignition systems that happened to fail in a weird way, leaving documents, books, and cassettes for the Swiss police to study. The last will of Joe was for Patrick Varnet, a member, to send about 300 pieces of mail to the politicians and media. 4 pages in all, called testaments. And to my knowledge, these have never been publicly leaked. 60 more letters were also sent to scholars, government officials, and journalists, detailing the ideas and beliefs of the cult. All labeled from Depart, Transit Core, and the address was 33 Golden Street in Zurich. Some believe that this mass exodus was of the non-complying type. Some believe it was a mass exodus of the complying type, but no one knows for sure. It is known that Joe and Luc orchestrated it, probably Joe more so than Luc, as Joe had a note that was not destroyed by the fire. And it read, Following the... No, I can't do that. Following the Cherie transit, we wish to make it clear, on behalf of the Rosy Cross, that we deplore and totally disassociate ourselves from the barbaric, incompetent, and aberrant behavior of Dr. Luc Jouret. Taking the decision to act on his own authority against all our rules, he has transgressed our code of honor and is the cause of a veritable carnage that should have been a transit carried out in honor, peace, and light. His departure does not correspond to the ethics we represent and defend to posterity. This is most likely because Luc poisoned all the members and himself as the Exodus instead of whatever happened at the farm. That is, until you realize that Joe was at Chéri and not Salvan, where Luc was found. I'm at a lot. Yeah, maybe someone in the comments will know or figure it out, but I thought about it for like 2 weeks straight. The investigators into this decided to order the remnants of the locations destroyed to not attract those that were curious. But the exoduses weren't over yet. In Vercors, France, 16 people were found immolated in a star formation in a forest clearing, 3 among them being young kids. Most, including the children, were sedated and shot in the same manner as the Chéri farm. At least 4 struggled, including Olympic athlete Edith Bonlieu. A member by the name of I'm not gonna try, testified to the police that he believed he would have been a victim if he didn't nope out of there at the first sign of treachery. He believed the cult wanted exactly 54 members because the original Templars that were burned at the stake, there were 54 of them. Still not done though. Saint-Casimir, Quebec. 3 years later, 2 couples of Solar Temple members were found dead in the house burning. 3 teenagers, the children of one of the couples, were found alive but heavily drugged. Again, the fire was set with an automatic system. In total, 72 members got exodused, about 8 of them being children, sadly. And it could have been worse. Apparently, when the Canadian police raided the Quebec compound in '93, there was an exodus that was supposed to take place, so the Swiss police tried to charge Tabashnik with the orchestration, but he was cleared. The Canadians, however, had a very different idea. They charged him with conspiracy in Quebec, but was acquitted. They charged him again, but he was again acquitted. But the investigators demolishing the sites may have destroyed evidence. Dambro may have had links to a Toulon godfather as well. But these are all conspiracies at the moment, and nobody knows for certain, but for the happy ending, Tabashnik went back to being part of the orchestra. So in this video, let's talk about how to avoid a cult. 1. Don't follow someone who impersonates a psychiatrist. 2. Don't live in a commune. 3. Know a lot about whatever religion they claim to be a part of. 4. Don't listen to doomsday prophecies. People have been saying that the world was going to end ever since the first utterance of language in history. 5. Don't pay membership fees. Sorry to the Catholics, it's just weird. And finally, have some self-worth. That said, though, Heaven's Gate and Jonestown stole their entire goddamn flow, word for word, bar for bar.